I was out hunting in northern Ontario. No roads except for a logging road, within 130 kilometers. I was late on bear season, so no one was really out hunting in my quadrant. I found a nice campsite alongside a river and hunted from there. On the second day of my hunt, I came across the bear tracks I tracked for about 2 hours, and then I turned around. This is when shit got very fucking weird. I always track on one side of the tracks and return on the other. About 200 meters down the east side of the tracks, I ran into another human footprint, which disappeared across the trail and into the woods on the west. My dog didn't seem to smell anything, so I returned to camp with minimal concern. I got back to camp at around 7:30 at night and made a quick dinner, had a cigar by the camp, and at around 12 o'clock, I heard a snap of a branch. After hunting for 20 years, only two things snap branches: bears and humans. I grabbed my firearm and a flashlight and went out after the noise. Every 100 yards, I would scan with the flashlight, and my dog freaked, started growling and advancing into the woods slowly. I pulled back on my leash to slow his advance and switched on my flashlight. I saw a pair of eyes looking right back at me. It stared for about 5 seconds and disappeared into the woods. On the walk back, I felt anxious, scared, and completely uncomfortable. I could feel that someone was watching me. The next night, the same thing happened. My dog went wild, like I've never seen him. He was whimpering and growling and very, very anxious. At this point, I was terrified. I didn't go hunting that day, and didn't close my eyes once. That night, I sat up with my flashlight, constantly scanning the tree line. I guess I dozed off at around 1 and woke up at 3. I was sweating, confused, and very scared. I scanned the forest, and just barely visible about 25 yards into the forest, there was a man and his dog. He was looking right back at me. I started to approach him, shouting to him. I got within 10 feet. He looked awfully disheveled and stank. The worst part was that he just stared and smiled. His eyes showed zero emotion as he whispered, "Good night." I ran back to my tent, packed all my shit up, loaded it into the trailer of the ATV, and drove out of there. I worked at a campground on night shift. 12 a.m. until 8 a.m. every night. It wasn't bad. I'd bring my PS2 and just game a good portion of the night, only having to deal with 1 or 2 people, and that was on busy nights. It was just me in this little 8x8 shack, with nothing around but dark, all night. My first week there, the other third shift guy, who was quitting, told me about this payphone a few feet from the shack where I worked. He said that it rang every night at exactly 4:17 a.m., and just once. It was probably just an automated test call, he guessed. He never answered it himself. I go for a few months on the job, and it was the middle of summer, so most nights I had the windows closed, so I couldn't really hear the payphone go off. Mid-August, I started leaving the windows open during the night. Sure enough, at 4:17 a.m. every morning the phone would ring just once. And the ring sounded creepy, like the payphone was submerged in water and then just put where it sat. One night, I got up the nerve to answer it. I set an alarm at 4:15 and I would go wait at the phone until it rang. When it did, I answered it. But there was no sound, just dead air, like there was someone on the other line, but they weren't answering. I said hello a few times and hung up. I did this every night for a week with the same result. I didn't think anything of it and left it alone after that for about a month. The first week of October, I decided to answer the phone call once again. I set my alarm, and when the time came, I answered the phone. Hello? Hello? Then I heard what sounded like someone inhaling through clenched teeth. The voice that sounded was rough and like he was gargling gravel. The best comparison I can give is Horace P. Gage from The Suffering. He said my name. My complete name. First, middle, and last. It was a voice I'd never heard. My voice caught in my throat and I hung up. I rattled some change into the payphone and hit *69. The number came from California. I live in Indiana. I used to work for a group home, taking care of kids with autism or developmental problems. The company had multiple group homes, but none of them were within a mile of each other, and they were all in the middle of the boondocks in farm country. Each had a driveway of about half a mile and surrounded by nothing but countryside. The locations were chosen specifically for this, so that if a client were to escape, they would have to run through a wide open field for quite some time. One night at about 2 a.m., when I was working the graveyard shift with a coworker, we noticed some headlights coming down the driveway. We thought that it was an administrator coming to do a night check, to make sure that the staff wasn't sleeping and that the bed checks were updated. So we started frantically running around doing our paperwork, filling in our bed checks, and turned our movie off when we realized that the headlights hadn't moved. I stepped outside, lit up a cigarette, and took a few steps down the driveway and noticed a white van about a quarter of the way down the driveway. I stayed there for about 7 or 8 minutes and watched it as it drove off. Me and my coworker were kind of baffled and came to the conclusion that the person was just lost and had to look at a map. Then, 3 days later, a serial killer was caught in our area. The killer was a man by the name of Stephen Brian Fennell, and he was known for picking up women on that exact road of our group home on I-40 in Bear, Delaware. He drove a white van. When I was a kid, we'd go to these beach cabins in Maryland, right next to the Chesapeake. They were small, rustic ordeals with basic comfort, nothing fancy like TVs or air conditioning. 2 bedrooms and a cot in the kitchen, and my siblings and I rotated on the cot so that no one got too sore from it. A small tradition was that my mom and I would have a hot cup of tea right before bed, in our summer jammies, and it was just our way of relaxing while everyone else went off to read or listen to music. Well, one night I was settling on the cot when she picked up the tea kettle to fill it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see her flinch, then say in a steady voice, "What are you doing there?" My head whipped over to the kitchenette to see her looking out the window. Then she jumped back and started screaming for my father. Somehow he knew shit was getting real. He ran from the back bedroom and barely paused to see my mom point towards the left side of the house. He burst out the door and towards the left of the cabin. I'll be the first to admit I ran like a motherfucker and baseball slid under my parents' bed. Because, damn it, I was 10 and that's what kids do when they're terrified. I still remember the smell of the old wood and the feel of my teddy bear shielding me from whatever the hell was happening. I remember seeing my 14-year-old brother. Then a medium-ranked karate student, follow my dad out of the cabin at full speed. The rest of the story is just a retelling of what I heard and what my family filled in for me. My father, a former Army sergeant and MP with the Bronze Star, managed to tackle the guy that had been peeping into our kitchen window. He put him in an elbow lock face down in the ground, and my brother was standing sentinel over both of them, and my mom ran to get the cell phone that we bought just 2 weeks earlier. And this was in 1995, and those suckers had cords and everything. While my mom called 911, I remember hearing the guy talking, saying things like the Ouija board fucking told me. I want that devil to suck my fucking brains out. Satan is in cabin 10. I have to get to cabin 10. The devil wants to kill me, and so on and so forth. We were in cabin 3, over a half a mile from where he apparently intended to meet the devil. My dad kept a grip on him for probably a good 15 minutes until those cops showed up. The first thing out of one's mouth was, "Jamie, when they let you out?" He'd been released from jail just 2 weeks earlier for arson. You know where he was standing when my mom was at the sink in the kitchen? Right beside the propane tank. Okay, so I spent about 6 months in Europe. Mostly alone, but meeting up with friends here and there. I went to Amsterdam for a week at the beginning of my trip and 2 weeks at the end. Maybe 2 or 3 days before I was supposed to come back to the US, I planned a lovely day of getting really baked and walking to the enormous and lovely Vanderbilt Park. Before continuing, I'm going to say that Amsterdam is nothing like in the movies. It's beautiful, full of canals, museums, bikers, swans, etc. It's just great. Anyway, so I got insanely high and began my trek to the park. On the way, this short dude who looked like a young Steve Buscemi walked past me, going the opposite way, and I accidentally made eye contact. He stopped and wanted to talk to me, even though I told him I wasn't interested in conversation. Then insisted that he walked me to the park to keep me safe. He asked me tons of questions and told me all about himself while I kept insisting that I didn't want to talk and just wanted to go alone and meet my friends. After about a 40-minute walk from hell, we entered the park and I pointed to the nearest building and said I was meeting them inside. And I said bye, then ran into the building. I was inside sitting to the side of the front door for about 20 minutes when he came inside. He saw me and I saw him, and then he quickly ran out the door. At that point, I was really upset that he was following me, and I stayed inside the building for another hour. I peeked through the window and saw him, sitting on a bench directly outside the building. I told the woman working at the front counter that there was a man following me, and asked if they knew any other exits or way out of the park. At this point, my buzz was completely gone and replaced with cold apprehension. They directed me to a little side path that exited to a small side street, but would quickly connect to the main street again. So I left through the back and went out that way. About halfway down this quiet cobblestone road outside the park, I suddenly heard pounding feet. And then I was grabbed from behind and slapped so hard that I screamed and hit the ground. A couple walking together looked over and kept walking. He yelled, "That's what you get for lying to me," then ran off, breathing hard. I started crying and ran to the main street and began speed walking through the crowd and back in the direction of my hostel. I was terrified, but I just kept walking faster and faster and faster. After a few minutes, I glanced over my shoulder, and he was immediately behind me, walking in my footsteps. I almost threw up in panic and went into the first doorway I can find while he disappeared into the crowd. I begged the employees at the jewelry store to call the police, but they told me no. The police station was only a few blocks away and gave me really confusing directions. I asked the other customers if anyone would be willing to call the police because a man was chasing me, but everyone just ignored me. They asked me to leave, so I went outside and began walking again, but watched for streetcars. I walked casually for a few minutes, and then just as a streetcar was pulling away, I leapt into it and rode it back to the north part of the city. This was really terrifying for me. Being a chubby, awkward girl from a nice suburb, I've never really had to be afraid of strange men before. When I got off the train, I had no idea where I was and I just sat down and cried. After maybe 15 minutes, though, a walking tour went by, and at the end of it, there were these two geeky, maybe 15, 16-year-old German boys who I'd met a few days before. And they instantly recognized me and invited me to join the tour, which ended up being really fun. All in all, really terrifying afternoon, but a really fun evening. I hope you ghouls enjoyed these really creepy stranger interactions. I don't know what you want to call them. They're creepy. This is like my fear, is just having some weird person watching me through a window or like trying to blow up my house like that guy tried to do. Like, you cannot trust people and it's so scary. But if you ghouls have any creepy random people, stranger interactions, or encounters, let me know in the comments because I really like to read them. And sometimes I just get stuck reading them and I don't respond or like them because I'm just scrolling through and reading them. So I apologize if the last couple videos I haven't really done much because I just get so enthralled. And then I have to get thrown back into the real world of work and cooking and cleaning and all that mumbo jumbo. But as always, ghouls, the last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.